Hello, everyone. So some of you may have attended the last SD-WAN webinar we did. This one will be a deeper dive, and it will be specific to the Cisco SD WAN solution. Cisco's SD WAN solution, this particular iteration of it, came through the acquisition of Viptela, which closed last year and now is incorporated fully into Cisco as the Cisco SD WAN solution. So that's what we'll be looking at. There are other solutions. Also, some of you submitted questions ahead of time. I'll cover those at the end, and then if there's additional questions, we'll go through those as well. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you that might not know, a little bit of background on who LA Networks is. We were founded in 1997. We were started and are still managed and led by engineers primarily. About 75% of our staff are engineers, so we're very engineering focused and heavy. It's a little bit different for a Cisco Gold partner, and we tend to be recognized in the industry for our engineering expertise. We're fairly passionate about advanced technologies, whether it's SD-WAN or software-defined access or anything else, data center technologies, etc. We have 5 dedicated practices, and we have staff dedicated to each of these: managed services, collaboration, data center, enterprise networking, and security. What we're working with today will mostly be focused on the enterprise networking component and potentially the managed services if you'd be interested in any kind of managed service for your WAN. We do have a very proven track record of expertise, particularly with Cisco. We are a Cisco Gold partner. We hold advanced specializations in architectures and collaboration, data center, enterprise networking, and security. And we also are a advanced technology partner for ACI, Cisco's SDN solution for the data center as well. We did a fairly large ACI rollout for a service provider back east a while ago, for example. So we have good experience in all of those. And then lastly, our main commitment is a pledge of partnership directly with any company that we work with. So we tend to be very client-centered on our culture, and we've always felt that the best way to get the next project is to complete the current one to all expectations, hopefully exceeding those. And so we tend to go through that as our #1 priority when we're working with anyone. So that's a little bit about who we are. These are some of the key partners that we work with. And with that, we'll go ahead and hop right in. If you attended the last webinar, there are a few slides overlapping, but most of this will be new content today and not a lot of slides. We'll spend some time on the demo as well. The first question you might be asking yourself is SD-WAN even real? Is it something that you really need to worry about? Maybe you're here just because you keep hearing about it, but you're not even sure what it is, what it does it matter, does it not? So in our experience, yes, it's definitely very much real. Unlike some of the other software-defined technologies have caught on a little bit more slowly, but SD-WAN has caught on pretty fast, and we're seeing large-scale adoption. Back at the end of 2015, Gartner was predicting that by the end of 2019, roughly 30% of enterprises will have deployed SD-WAN at their branches, and that was up from only 1% at the end of 2015. I think that may even be a conservative number, although I don't know that. In most of our accounts, we're seeing very good traction with us. It's a fairly easy to use technology, and it solves some problems that people are running into. Those problems tend to group. The big one would be increasing bandwidth while reducing the circuit cost. We do that by maybe replacing your MPLS, maybe not replacing your MPLS, but leveraging low-cost, high-bandwidth internet, right? So those two kind of go hand in hand, that people see that when they're deploying SD-WAN, they can reduce their circuit cost over MPLS while also increasing their bandwidth. People driven towards it because of the improved application experience. If you've ever had to deal with command line QoS, you know that it can get quite complex. So with most SD-WAN solutions, and definitely with Cisco's SD-WAN solution, there is an intelligence engine built in that has some app recognition, and it's particularly friendly for apps that might cloud-based, software as a service, something like Office 365 or Salesforce.com and so forth. And so it's very nice to be able to detect those rather automatically than having to know IPs and ports and so forth. That leads to simplified management. And we'll take a look at the Vmanaged console today for this solution, and you'll kind of get a feel for what the management looks like, and you'll note right away, I believe, that it's a very simplified experience from what you're used to for managing traditional or legacy WAN. And then lastly, security, kind of where and how you need it. There's always a balance to be struck when it comes to security, and security's on top of everyone's mind these days. One of the nice things with the Cisco SD WAN solution is it's very flexible on how and where you deploy your security. If you want to allow internet access out at the branches, for example, there's a architecture that we can reference for that. If you want to allow limited internet access so that they could get to maybe their infrastructure as a service clouds or their software as a service clouds at the branch, but everything else comes back to a choke point, you could do that. If you'd rather have everything come back through a choke point, more traditional, that's fine as well. So there's a lot of flexibility. And when you tie all these together and put it under a simplified management interface, it's a pretty compelling use case. And I think that's the big differentiator on why SD-WAN got such good adoption early on. What's driving some of those things? Well, I kind of broke it into 4 general categories. One is our users and clients. We're seeing workforce expand, but in different ways than we were used to, whether it's expanding more branch offices. Retail has really exploded, for example, and this solution is really good for a retail outfit. Also, we're dealing with non-traditional users. You might have things like IoT devices or smart buildings and so forth. And how do I make sure that they get onboarded and get the access that they require, but not more access than they require, right? Applications, I think everyone could probably agree that applications tend to dominate the business landscape these days. They are more or less the lifeblood of the company. And as infrastructure folks and network folks, it's all about how do we enable those applications so that the business can be successful. And things like QoS, and we have to have a good, solid way of not just deploying something, but making sure that it's dynamic enough and flexible enough that when applications update, it can update with them. And then that we can report upon it. We can explain to someone, here's exactly what we saw and how we enabled this success, right? We already talked a bit on security, but there's just so many threats out there these days, so many breaches, and everyone is top of mind. We have all these demands going on our time and on our networks at the same time. We're being asked for more and more protection. So how are we going to deal with those requirements? And all these come back to the way that business has shifted in terms of how quick and agile it kind of demands a network or an infrastructure to be, right? And those things are what is driving these other 3 pillars, at least in my view. And I tend to think that this is probably the new normal, and we should get used to it. For those of you who have been in IT as long as I have, you'll remember how easy it used to be to get an outage window, to do an upgrade, or to do some patching or something. And probably most people on this call could now agree that it's difficult to get even basic patching outage windows, right? So we have all these demands while we have all these requests and requirements as well, and it's all about balancing that out somehow. So at a high level, when we take a look at Cisco's kind of holistic approach to SD-WAN, it's very simple and easy to explain. You have these items on the left. They could be users, they could be devices, they could be anything, but there's something there on the left, and it's trying to get over to the right, and that's where your applications are. Again, this is all about application enablement, right? And so we want to enable our users and our devices and our things to be able to get to our applications. And it shouldn't matter if those users, devices, and things are in a headquarters, in a branch, or in a small home office, or in a manufacturing plant. And it shouldn't matter if those applications are in an on-prem data center, or in AWS, or Office 365, or any of those. But while we do that, we also want to ensure that our traffic is secure, that our solution can scale, and that it plays nicely with everything else. It's fairly open in terms of how we interact with it, right? And this is what drove Cisco's acquisition of Viptela. Is they felt Viptela had really answered most of these, and that Cisco has obviously an excellent track record with some of these other items, particularly around the infrastructure networking components. And so that's what led to this. Everything we see today will be based around 4 main pillars, and that is cloud delivered architecture, application quality of experience, comprehensive security, and agile operation. And I really want to focus on that agile operation because, again, I just see this a lot with our clients where they're being asked to do more faster with less interruption. And so if you don't have something that's flexible and agile, that becomes very difficult, if not completely impossible. So this whole solution is really centered around these 4 different pillars. The only one that's a little bit of a asterisk is the cloud delivered architecture. Everything we talk about today, it's cloud delivered by default. There are on-prem equivalents. So if you are a company that maybe has a policy where you don't do any cloud capabilities, all this can be delivered on-prem, but it was architected originally from a cloud perspective. So let's take a look at what this solution kind of looks like, right? So data plane is called a vEdge router, and this could be, if you're familiar with the old Viptela solution, it could be a traditional vEdge router like a 100 or something like that. It could also be an ISR 4K, so you have some flexibility on what form factor you want your vEdge router in. And one of the key ingredients is to be aware that it's transport independent. So it doesn't matter if you're going over MPLS, internet, cellular on a 4G, or all 3, or any combination of these. It could be 2 MPLS, it could be 3 internets, it could be 2 internets and a 4G, any combination. It's completely handoff agnostic. Everything that's going in and out of the data plane is encrypted, right? So you can see that we've got our little lock down there at the data plane level. That's because everything that leaves, whether it's the cloud, the data center, the campus, the branch, or a small home office, everything leaves that location encrypted. We have an abstracted control plane, which is pretty typical in all software-defined solutions. That's kind of the heart or crux of an SD something these days, is an abstracted control plane. In this case, the control plane is up in a cloud, and we call it the vSmart controller. Those are the cluster devices that are going to go out and actually implement any changes or any configuration down on the data plane, right? And then you tend to log in and build your network through the management plane, and that's something called a Vmanaged. That's also up in a cloud, and so it can be reached from virtually anywhere. And so the way that this kind of works is you would log into the Vmanaged, you build out your intent, and it's not like a Cisco router if you're a more traditional network engineer, where you log into a point device, make a change, save it, log into the next device, make a point change, save it. In this case, we log into a vManaged controller. We'll take a look at this today. And you kind of build out whatever your intent is. And like from a QS perspective, it could be things like, I want all my voice traffic and my video traffic to stay on the MPLS network if possible, right? And fail over to the internet if need be. And maybe I want all my other traffic to stay on the internet and fail over to MPLS if need be. And it's more generic like that, as opposed to worrying about things like source IPs and destination IPs and protocol numbers and so forth. And then we'll talk about something called a vBond. This is used for low touch or no touch provisioning, and we'll kind of demo what that looks like today, as well as have an in-depth slide on it. And then something called Vanalytics. I'm not going to be able to demonstrate Vanalytics today, but Vanalytics is all about being able to have analytical data on what's going on with your WAN, right? So being able to provide nice graphical reports on things like utilization and efficiencies and outages and SLAs and so forth. Vanalytics is the module that would enable all those capabilities. And then it's important to understand that from the vManaged perspective, it is a RESTful API. You can do third-party automation. You could do and pull data off of that vManage and put those graphs and charts and stuff to your NOC dashboard or something like that. So you have a lot of openness and flexibility there for third-party integration and automation. Okay, and this is just to kind of re-talk a little bit about some of these points. I'm not going to beat this one to death, but be aware that because of the separation of the management, control, and data plane, we can scale this very high. The Cisco SD WAN solution has some clients have done over 5,000 WAN nodes in this solution. So it can scale very high because we can scale any one of those that we need to, however fast we need to do it. It does have redundant management. We saw that vSmart controllers are in a cluster, right? The zero touch provisioning, I think you'll really like that, right? You bring up branch sites now in a couple of minutes, and you don't send anyone out. Typically, you would just ask the site contact, hey, could you please move the cable from this port on your old router into this port on the Cisco SD WAN Vmaged, and then it's going to go ahead and just self-provision, and we'll walk through that. And then, I think that the term single pane of glass is probably overused these days, but you do get that single pane of glass ability with the Vmanaged controller. You can go in there and see all your WAN sites and everything that's going on. And like I said, it could also integrate with other systems. So if you want to take that, if you have two different systems managing different items, you could kind of solidify some of that information into one single place. As I mentioned before, be aware that this solution could be on-premises or cloud. The default is always cloud, but there is an on-premise path if that's your kind of goal. As far as those vEdge routers, those could be physical or virtual, right? So this has we're not going to go through the AWS integration, but it has a very elegant AWS integration, for example. It also fits very well if you want to manage in-house or prefer to use it as a managed service. We do this for a couple of our customers now, where we do managed WAN specifically through a solution like this. And this just shows you some of the different capabilities at the different layers, right? So again, transport independent fabric. On application delivery, there is site survivability. So I can put multiple appliances at a given site and have hardware redundancy along with circuit redundancy. This is a fairly unique capability. You would think, if you come from a traditional routing background, that seems like a no-brainer. But that's actually fairly unique to the Cisco solution here. A QoS, which is built in and very elegant and easy and simple to use. Currently, I believe, detects automatically about 3,000 applications in its signature database, including a lot of the common cloud apps like Office 365 and Salesforce and others, ServiceNow. So you have a very elegant QoS model. AppAware Routing, this is an ability, we may demo this later depending if we have time, but the AppAware Routing is very nice in that it can basically say, hey, be aware of my apps and what kind of a network they like, and put them on the cloud that is most appropriate, right? So if it is voice, for example, it's probably always going to go over the MPLS cloud. However, if all of a sudden the MPLS cloud is having some kind of performance issue, you're suddenly seeing high latency or jitter or something like that in the MPLS cloud, AppAware Routing says, okay, let me just go ahead and move it over to the broadband until I see that MPLS cloud issue go away. And Cloud Path and app-specific acceleration, those are also features I think probably most people are aware already of what WAN optimization looks like, and we can do similar capabilities here. From a monitoring perspective, it's very nice, and you'll see when we get into the Vmanaged console that the monitoring looks very good. There is an ecosystem that goes with this product, and with Cisco, that's only gotten bigger because they already have so many other partners that they work with. So we see that this plays very nicely in that perspective. And then, as I mentioned, we're not going to demo it today, but there is an add-on module for vAnalytics. We'll show you some of the basic analytics that you get, which are already very nice. You do get flow-based analytics and interface stats and things like that, just right out of the box, very simple. And so we'll take a look at some of those. So let's talk about the zero-touch provisioning. And I'll be the first one to admit zero-touch may be overstating, but I think in general, it's not too much overstating. Effectively, it does make an assumption, and that assumption is that on my internet link, I do have DHCP, and that DHCP also includes a DNS server that has the ability to resolve ztp.viptela.com. If this assumption is true, then you're going to be fine for a zero touch. Really, you just need to send it out. Someone just needs to plug in the cable, and the rest will happen. If it isn't, that's okay. You don't have to, but then you're going to have to go into the console and set the static IP in the DNS. And you'll note that the DNS resolves to this by default. However, you could do this in an on-prem solution if you needed to change it. Once it comes up with its IP, it sends out a query to what we call a Vmon server. And as part of that, it sends up its serial number. That serial number, before it ships over to you, gets registered to your company account so that they know that it goes into your cloud management portal. So it kind of identifies itself to the vBond. The vBond responds and says, oh, okay, you've got this serial number, you're at this location, I would like you to please go talk to this orchestration component. And then it goes up and it talks, sends up a hello to the management cluster. It comes back and it says, oh, okay, so you're coming up, Mr. vEdge. I want to make sure you're aware that you're going to put in the following template. You're going to come up, you're going to have the following policies. You're going to be part of the following networks. And we'll talk a little bit about templates when we get into the demo. And then the final step is it comes in after it configures itself and it fully registers and says, okay, I am now 100% up and I am ready to start forwarding traffic. And while this looks like a lot going on here, this whole process takes place typically in a few minutes. So it's not a very long process. It pops right up into your Vmanaged. You can look at it right away. You can start doing things, or you could do nothing. You could just have a default policy that says, hey, anytime a device comes up, put on this basic template and let it just start forwarding traffic. With that, we're going to go ahead and start heading into the demo. I just want to show you a little bit what the demo environment looks like logically. This isn't what it looks like physically at all, but logically it effectively gives us two hubs. In our case, one that's in San Jose, one that's in North Carolina, and then it gives us a couple of spokes as well. We say hub and spoke, and that kind of comes with all sorts of legacy baggage. It doesn't really matter. We can full mesh these hub spoke. We aren't defined by those terms really in this solution, but I put it in those terms just because it's probably more familiar to most of you to think of it that way. You'll see that we are connected to an MPLS cloud, and we're also connected to an internet cloud. And then of course we have our management cloud up there with our vBond, our Vmanaged, our vSmart. And so this is what the Vmanaged console looks like. And let me explain first a little bit. One of the first things you might see is these are our vEdges. There's 7 of them, but one of them is down. That's the site that we're going to bring up through the zero touch provisioning. Okay, so to kind of simulate this, I had to bring that site down kind of manually, and so we'll work through bringing it back up. The intent isn't really to showcase the up-down statistics on the dashboard, but they are quite nice, and you can see it's very easy to tell what's going on, but it's more just to simulate a zero touch, which is one of the big advantages of a system like this. So one of the first things we'll come into are templates. So when devices come up and they log in with the vBond and check in and say, hey, here's my serial number and so forth, and it sends it over to your management cluster, it's going to use a template. These are pre-built templates that we've kind of created. We're going to go ahead and edit one of those and take a look at it. The templates allow you to basically define a connectivity or a application strategy or all those things for a particular site, or maybe a classification of sites. And I think classification is the way that ultimately we want to think about those things. Hey, I want all my North America sites to behave like this, whereas maybe I want my European sites to behave like that. Or maybe I want all my large sites to behave one way and all my small office sites to behave a different way. So there's a lot of flexibility with these templates. We'll take a look at one right now. So you take this template, we're going to attach it to the branch that we're about to bring up. We're about to bring up branch 2. And this is what a template kind of looks like. It has some particular information. And this is a pre-built template. When you build these from the ground up, you're going to define, over on the left, you're going to define these generic items, and then on the right, you'll update them for a particular location so it knows how to grab it. Then we'll just hit next. And it will take a couple of minutes, but it won't take terribly long. While that's happening, I wanted to show you So this is kind of the dashboard for the network components. You can see we already have a couple of, you see that branch 2 is not currently in an up state. That's because that's the template that we just deployed, and I haven't gone in and unshut the interface. But you can see the other sites are up. You can see what their statuses are. You can pull information from them. Let me go ahead and start the bring up the remote vEdge. You normally wouldn't do this. Again, this is just a step I'm going to do. This is just a step that I'm going to do in order to bring up to demonstrate the zero touch capabilities. So you would normally never do this. It's just that I kind of manually bring down an interface before the device has been managed, and then that's what allows me to act as if that branch has never come online. So normally you would just have these devices shipped to your branches. They would plug them in. You would attach the template, and they would be good to go. And that's kind of what we'll demonstrate now. If we come over here, you'll see that already it's come up, and I've gone from 6 up and 1 down on my vEdges to 7 up. The arrows are indicating the operational status. An up arrow means that that's an up device. Down arrow means that that's a down device. So I want to show you some of the neat stats you kind of get right out of the gate with this. So if you log into a particular device here and take a look at the monitor console, it'll give you typical SNMP stats right away. You can see what the CPU is like, what the memory is like, what it's looked like historically. We can change how that graph kind of looks and so forth. We can come in and we can take a look at the interfaces on a particular box, okay? And what the status is, again, up arrows means up, down arrow means down. We can take a look at what the throughput looks like, but even more than that, we can also take a look at some of the different flows, right? And this isn't something you would get off of a typical SNMP type puller application. And this is all built right into your Vmanaged console. So you're taking a look at that WAN. I don't have any a lot of apps traversing this right now, but if you do, you would suddenly see, your voice and video versus maybe your ERP, versus your Office 365, et cetera. And so we can get to a lot of detail. One thing I do want to point out is once you bring up a device, and you can see now that my branch 2 vEdge is up and online, it does take about 30 minutes before you get much data up in these the DPI and the flows and so forth. Okay, it takes about 30 minutes to baseline and collect enough data to have something to show. So likewise, troubleshooting can be done from here. You can do pings and trace routes, for example. Trace routes are very nice because they give you a graphical show of the different hops, which is nice when you're working with the service providers. You maybe want to show where you're getting a spike in latency. We don't have to do a copy and paste from a command prompt or from a router or something like that, which is always a little bit more difficult. It's a graphical tool, which is a nice way to go. So, and again, just to point out, back here on the main dashboard, we see that we've gone from 1 edge down to 7 edges up, right? And we can see, we can kind of see what that looks like. We do have still a little bit of time, so I kind of wanted to go in and show some policies, the AppAware Routing. So we talked about this. This is the ability to let's see if I activate this. And again, I probably won't have enough data to demonstrate it, but I kind of want to show you what it looks like. AppAware Routing is the ability for your vEdges to become intelligent enough to know based on traffic signatures what the best cloud for a particular style of traffic is. So for example, again, if you're on a MPLS and an internet, it makes your vEdge intelligent enough to say, oh, well, I probably always want to take the MPLS cloud. I mean, in general, that's just going to be a higher class of service, right? And so the AppAware routing does that kind of automagically, and it acts kind of like a PFR style feature, if you're familiar with that in Cisco lingo, meaning that it's not just something you do manually. It actually is fairly app intelligent, and it can say, oh, voice traffic is very sensitive to things like latency and jitter, out of order frames, and so forth. And if I see that sort of behavior on a particular cloud, I want to move to a different transport mechanism, right? And so we've turned on AppAware routing, and if I open up a different browser or a different tab real quick, this is just a WAN. This is just a WAN emulator, and it allows me to add latency in. So if I introduce an extra 100 milliseconds of latency into the WAN, what you would see, and again, I don't think I'll have enough data to actually show you this, but if I came up to monitor in network now, yeah, I don't have enough data, but what you would see, let's see if I can take a look at a different device perhaps. So what you would see, unfortunately, I don't have the interface for this hooked up. I don't believe I have this interface hooked up to my WAN emulator, but you would see it defaults. By the way, this blue one happens to be the MPLS. It defaults to feeling that the best link is the MPLS. And what you would have with AppAware routing is when you come down onto your flows, you would find that your voice traffic would suddenly start preferring the internet when you add that extra 100 milliseconds across the MPLS. If this is something you really want to see, we could schedule like an on-site or something like that and pre-warm up the data, because it does take about 30 minutes, which I'm not going to hold you guys on here for an extra 30 minutes just to see a graph. But you would have that capability with AppAware routing to go ahead and take a look at that. We would just pre-warm the data for you a little bit so that it has time to collect some numbers. But that's what the AppAware routing does. And it does that, again, just kind of out of the box. It's something that you can kind of get and turn on right away with really little effort. That is really what I wanted to show you in the demo portion of things. When you registered, you had the option to pre-ask some questions, and so I have a couple of those that I wanted to go through now, and then if there are other questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat, and we can review those as well. The first question, and I got this one a couple of times, which is, how does Cisco SD WAN compare to other SD WAN solutions, right? And I always the answer is it depends on the two solutions you're kind of looking at. I tend to take SD-WAN solutions and break them into two main categories. One is it's an SD-WAN solution first and foremost. It was written as an SD-WAN solution, and it does other things as an add-on, or it was something else first and they added on a software overlay to make it an SD-WAN solution. So Tela was written from the ground up as an enterprise class SD-WAN solution. And so when it does things like WAN acceleration or firewalling or application inspections, those were add-ons after they got the SD-WAN portion pushed. But what it really did was it said, I want to be transport independent, I want to be app aware, I want to have route flexibility and solid management and reporting. And it delivers in spades in those things. If you take, for example, the Cisco Meraki SD-WAN solution, it was a firewall first. It's based off of their firewall product, the MX product line, and they added SD-WAN capability on top of the firewall. They basically said, well, look, we've already got thousands and thousands of sites that get connected with these firewalls. We already have this easy VPN style technology that allows very quick, easy dynamic tunnels to be brought up. Why don't we just wrap this with some software and make it an SD-WAN solution, allow some transport independence and some other things? And that's exactly what they did. So I tend to break SD-WAN into two main categories. Was it originally written as SD-WAN and then they added other features on, or was it another technology and they added SD-WAN on? One's not better than the other. It really depends on your use case, right? For example, when we talk about the Cisco SD-WAN versus the Meraki SD-WAN, both are very good, viable solutions with plenty of support and customers that are happy on them. But the Cisco SD-WAN one was an SD-WAN solution first, and that's kind of where its strengths are. You can tell with the cloud management and all that. And then the Meraki was a firewall first. Now, of course, Meraki delivers in spades on cloud management, but it is a firewall first, and then they added the SD-WAN kind of capabilities on it. If your main concern is, I want a firewall that can also do SD-WAN, the Meraki is the better solution for sure. Other than that, it really depends on the two products you kind of want to compare and contrast. One of the other questions that was pre-asked in the registration got asked a few different ways. Is this appropriate to small business, or is this appropriate to any size of company? How big does it scale? Those sorts of questions. So the answer is SD-WAN in general is appropriate to really any company that has a WAN. Okay, so now Cisco has two main SD-WAN solutions, and that's again the Meraki and the Cisco SD-WAN. The Meraki probably plays a little bit better in the SMB market than the Cisco SD-WAN, but you don't need to be a huge WAN to do the Viptela Cisco SD-WAN solution. We have a customer that's deploying this right now up in AWS with only effectively eight sites, 8 regional VPCs effectively. So it can be pretty flexible. The Cisco SD-WAN solution does scale very large. They were telling me about a retail giant that did 5,000 locations recently, for example. So it does scale pretty large. I don't think there's any limitations there. It's very flexible in terms of how many transports it can hook up to and so forth. And then all the management consoles are fairly different. Both are pretty easy to use. If you're already fully invested and happy with your Meraki, you're probably going to want to stick with your Meraki. If you're not, you probably I would say start with the Cisco SD-WAN and then look at the other ones. And then the next question that got asked was, and I talked a little bit about this, but was effectively, how open is the SD-WAN solution? Can it take tunnels or VPNs from third-party devices? Can you mix two different SD-WAN solutions? Questions kind of that nature. With the Cisco SD-WAN, this is a big differentiator from most of the other players. It will take IPsec tunnels from anything. Now, obviously, if it's a non-vEdge device on the far end, it's not going to manage it, but it will accept a tunnel from it. And that's a big differentiator between Cisco and most of the other competitors in the space. Is typically they need the same box on both sides. So the Cisco SD-WAN is fairly open in that regard. Specific to, can you take two different SD-WAN solutions and mix them? I don't think I could really answer that one very well, because it would really, again, depend on the two solutions. You could mix them probably to some degree in that, again, the Cisco SD-WAN is fairly open on its IPsec side of things. You could probably do some kind of a handoff, but I don't know if the other solution would support a VPN tunnel from a vEdge device, for example, right? I know some, for example, the last time I looked at VeloCloud, which is now owned by VMware and I think has been rebranded, but I think it did not accept those. It had to be a VeloCloud device on both the sides. That may have changed over time, I don't know. So that one would be a little bit tougher, but in general, it's a fairly open solution. You do have a lot of flexibility in there, but I won't say or tell you that it's infinitely flexible in any way, shape, or form. Those were kind of the three broad categories of questions I was asked before. Do we have any other questions that came up while we were going through the slides or the demo?
We do have a couple questions that have come in. The first one.
Okay, great.
Mike writes in, what do I need at my branch office / remote office in terms of minimum hardware? Thanks.
Sure. So you need some kind of vEdge device at your branch office. So that could either be a vEdge router or it could be an ISR running the vEdge software. So, but you need a vEdge at your branch location, and that's all you really need at your branch location. You could do two vEdges if that branch location is kind of critical and you want hardware redundancy, or if you're trying to do a like for like in terms of redundancy. But a vEdge router is the short answer. What was the next question?
Mike has a follow-up question. Can you see data from each workstation?
Can you see data from each workstation? So the answer is it depends. Depends on where that data from the workstation is going. If it's going across the WAN, you should be able to see it through the flows. However, you would not see traffic that goes from one workstation, say in a branch, to another workstation in the same branch, because that traffic would never be going through the vEdge device, right? The vEdge device can only report on what it sees. So if there are flows that do not go through the vEdge, then you would not see those. So this isn't a replacement, for example, for any kind of flow-based tool like StealthWatch. However, you would see flows if they go through the. Next question.
Questions are just piling in here. The next one is coming from Charles. Charles writes, how frequently are stats pulled? Can it be 1 minute or less?
I'm sorry, how frequently was what?
Are stats pulled?
Oh, I think I know the answer to that, but we might be able to figure it out. I want to say every minute, but I could be wrong. Okay, we're starting to get some data in. I think it is, looks like every 5 minutes, at least by default. So that might be tunable. I've never tried to tune it, but it looks like the default is every 5 minutes. Stats are pulled. What was the next question?
Charles then has a follow-up where Charles writes in and says, does the VeloCloud compare with Cisco SD WAN?
Sure. So both solutions started as a pure SD WAN solution, so it falls into that first category that I talked about earlier. The Cisco SD WAN solution is probably a little more enterprise friendly. I have a client that's doing a comparison between both right now, and they had mentioned that currently the VeloCloud, for example, doesn't support hardware redundancy at the branches at this time, although it's roadmapped. And then they also mentioned it doesn't support VPNs from third parties at this time, although again, that's roadmapped. But whereas the Cisco SD WAN solution supports both of those, they're both actually pretty robust solutions. And I've run across both multiple times, both before it was Cisco SD WAN, it was Viptela, and currently it's Cisco SD WAN. And then I've run across VeloCloud several times as well, which is, I think, been rebranded as well since VMware bought them. But they're both fairly similar in that they have strong SD-WAN roots. They weren't other appliances that got turned into SD-WAN. The Cisco SD-WAN is a little more enterprise friendly versus the VeloCloud, I would say. And it's a little more open in that it'll take VPNs from any device. What was the next question?
The next question coming from George says, does the vEdge support HSRP or VRRP?
That's a good question. Thank you, George. And I didn't cover this before, and I probably should have. It supports routing. It supports OSPF, BGP, and static. So what you would really do is you would do routed links up to those, not like a spanning tree. So I wouldn't run a VRRP or anything like that. Instead, it does routing with dynamic load balancing if you have multiple devices. So that was a good question. Thank you.
Next one coming in from Robert. Robert asks, does the vEdge router sit in between the firewall and the ISP router? And he then expands on it. If it sits above the branch firewall, then would you be able to see the flow and inspect inside packets?
Okay, so let me break that into two. One is, does it sit in front of or behind the firewall? I know no one wants this answer, but it almost always applies to questions like this. It depends. You could do it either, and there are pros and cons both ways. Probably a better offline question. So if you want to send your contact information, we can have someone set up a meeting. But effectively, it really depends on the type of traffic and policy you want at those branches. For example, if you only want to allow the branches to be able to get to well-known software as a service providers and nothing else on the internet, you may not want a firewall because you can do deep packet inspection and application-based firewalling to a degree on the vEdge itself. However, if you want full internet access, and particularly if you want inbound rules and things like that, you definitely want a firewall. So if it went outside the firewall, I don't think it would be able to look at anything that's encapsulated it. Since the tunnel, you wouldn't have to do any tunnels on the firewall. So I think it would just see the firewall passing the traffic through. So I think you would still get the detailed statistics unless you had it for some reason in a tunnel that was on the firewall. If that happened, then you would only see everything looking as if it came from the firewall. I will say I probably see most commonly it's deployed behind the firewall with no firewall because they don't want to allow blanket internet at a branch. They just want to allow select internet at a branch, meaning, oh, I'll let you go to salesforce.com and I'll let you go to Office 365, but I won't let you go to, say, YouTube or Google, right? So anyway, long answer, and if you'd like something a little more personalized, please reach out and we'll have an account manager set something up. Was the next question?
We have two more at this time. This one is, if one is using Meraki switches, is there any benefit to sticking with the Meraki SD-WAN versus Cisco SD-WAN?
Sure, it's a good question. I touched on this a little bit. If you're already happy with Meraki and you have Meraki, I tend to say, these aren't hard and fast rules, these are opinions, but I tend to say you probably should just stay with Meraki because you're used to that management portal, you're used to that solution. If you already own MX firewalls at every branch along with your Meraki switches, I would definitely look at the Meraki SD-WAN as opposed to the Cisco SD-WAN because you've really already bought the Meraki SD-WAN at that point if you have the MX firewalls. If you only had the switches and you were just using like ISR routers today, or maybe you don't have a router, you just have a firewall like a ASA 5506 or something like that, then you probably want to do a little bit more of an evaluation between the two products and figure out which one makes the most sense for you. Just be aware if you went with, say, Meraki switches and a VeloCloud SD-WAN, I'm sorry, a Cisco SD-WAN solution, I will have then two management planes because I can't really pull the Meraki switches into my Vmanaged console or vice versa. Now, I think you probably could pull some of the graphs from both of those into a third-party product. You might even be able to pull some of the data from one into one of the others directly, but you would have two management consoles until you did something of that nature. So hopefully that that answers the question. But and I'll just put this generally: if anyone wants to have follow-up discussions, please send us an email and we'll get an account manager to schedule something. So what was the next question?
So our final question of the day is this better than Cisco IWAN?
I would say it's very different than Cisco IWAN. So is it better? Better is kind of a subjective term. To me, I would say in general, yeah, I think it is better because IWAN wasn't a product. I couldn't go and buy an IWAN SKU, right? What I really bought were point products, and then I used an IWAN architecture to kind of unify them. And while IWAN could deliver on a lot of the things that SD-WAN delivers on, meaning I could have transport independence, I could do load sharing. If I turn on things like PFR, and NBAR2 and so forth, I can get application inspection. I can get AppAware Routing type of concepts, but it never had the strong software overlay that SD-WAN provides, right? There's nothing wrong with IWAN, and support for IWAN isn't going away anytime soon. I don't think there's any end of life announcements on any of that, or end of sale announcements even on any of that. But if I didn't have either today, I would absolutely not do IWAN. I would do Cisco SD-WAN, because that's a much stronger overall solution. Everyone, I want to thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. I know you had to eat at your desk to be able to sit in and watch this. I hope everyone got something from it. Please feel free to reach out if you do have additional questions, or you'd like to schedule something on site to talk through any of this or other concerns, questions, technologies, topics, etc. We'd be happy to have an account manager reach out to you and schedule something with one of our engineers. But thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.